The alarms began before Mira Hale even crossed the threshold of Lecture Vault 17, a low, thrumming pulse that rattled the crystalline walls as though the Academy itself recognized her and reacted like a living creature flinching from an old wound, and when she stepped inside, the lights flickered in a stuttering sequence that made cadets across the tiered seating shift nervously, whispering in unfamiliar clicks, hums, or tremors. The lone human in the Academy always drew attention, but this morning the air felt heavier, as if the room were holding its breath. Mira walked with the quiet ease of someone who had lived her life in places where stepping wrong meant being eaten, crushed, or struck by storms sharp enough to peel metal. She slipped into her seat at the back, always the back, and folded her arms while Instructor Vorthken scuttled forward on nervous limbs, his mandibles clinking as he activated the day's lecture. The red sigil Deathworld traits, classified, ignited above the podium, and the ambient noise died instantly. Even the ETH Deathworlders stopped flicking their tongues. Vorthken cleared his throat and began reciting the opening lines of the curriculum. A Class 7 Deathworld is defined by persistent, active environmental hostility. Mira raised her hand. She didn't raise it fast or defiantly, she raised it calmly, as though interrupting her teachers was a normal part of life. "Stop," she said, her voice steady. "You're describing my childhood." Every cadet froze. Even the atmospheric recyclers seemed to hesitate. Vorthken blinked rapidly, his insectoid equivalent of panic. "Miss Hale, this material is not metaphorical, these conditions are lethal in ways most species cannot fathom." Mira shrugged. "So were my storms." Murmurs swelled across the room. She could feel their eyes on her, the predator, the anomaly, the legend whispered about in corridors. Vorthken tried to continue: apex predators, microevolutionary pressure, continuous threat psychology, the whole litany of horrors that define Deathworld species. She interrupted every point with the same quiet certainty: "Yes, that was normal where I grew up, we had those everywhere, isn't that ordinary?" Each casual comment hit harder than a scream. Cadet Tarsik, a reptilian Deathworlder who prided himself on fearlessness, recoiled when she mentioned how Razorvine had once grown through her bedroom wall. Eileen, gelatinous and gentle, sank deeper into her seat, trembling. But the tipping point came when Vorthken tried to pull up Mira's colony of origin. He expected a simple readout. Instead, the holoscreen flashed: file restricted, level 6 authorization required. Gasps rippled through the class. Level 6 restrictions were older than most star nations. Vorthken attempted again. "File restricted, do not query." His mandibles clattered violently. "Miss Hale," he whispered, "why is your colony under a level 6 lock?" Mira looked at the screen with an expression that wasn't fear but recognition, a quiet, weary dread. "It wasn't locked before," she said softly. "Not when I lived there." And then the room changed. The temperature dropped. The lights stuttered. Every console powered down except the one displaying her restricted file. A single line appeared. "Archive protocol initiated. Subject identified, Mira Hale." A low hum rose from beneath the floor, too deep to be machinery, too rhythmic to be coincidence. Mira's breath caught, though not from surprise. She had heard this hum once before. The night the sky fractured. The night her colony died. Without warning, the classroom doors sealed with a metallic shutter, locking every cadet inside. Security drones descended from hidden ceiling compartments, sleek, obsidian machines meant for containment of catastrophic anomalies, not students. They encircled her with surgical precision, scanning her with shifting light patterns that made her skin itch in a way she remembered from childhood medical checkpoints, where doctors spoke in whispers and recorded her reflexes with frightened eyes. The drone's unified voice boomed through the hall: "Subject 7B, Delta confirmed. Prepare for archive retrieval." Vorthken staggered back. This cannot be." Retrieval protocols are reserved for extinct species, abandoned superweapons, or mistakes, Mira murmured. The floor vibrated harder now, rising to a pitch that made several cadets collapse, clutching their ears. A crack split the tiles beneath her boots, thin at first, then widening, glowing with a blinding internal light. Mira stayed perfectly still. She remembered this light. She remembered running from it as a child while her mother shoved her into the evacuation pod. She remembered the last words whispered urgently into her implant: "Your childhood was normal. Don't let them change the story." She had obeyed for years. But there was no hiding now. The crack exploded open in a spiraling plume of white energy, throwing desks and cadets across the room. Only Mira remained standing, untouched, hair whipping wildly in the storm of light. From the abyss beneath the floor, something rose. Something impossibly old. Something that did not belong anywhere near a functioning academy. A massive, humanoid construct forged of obsidian plates and luminescent circuitry ascended, each step bending the air around it. Its head bore a halo of rotating glyphs, symbols Mira could not read but had seen once before, carved into the ground outside her colony right before the sky tore apart. Whispers erupted among the cadets. "The Warden, it can't be, it hasn't moved in centuries." The Warden, the guardian of the deepest, forbidden layers of the archive, bowed its head to her. Not to the instructors. Not to the academy. To her. Mira stumbled back, shaking her head violently. "No. No, I'm not. Whatever you think I am, you're wrong." But the Warden's voice washed over the room in a layered chorus that resonated in bones rather than ears. Designation 7B, Delta. You were presumed lost. Retrieval sequence complete. Mira's pulse thrashed against her ribs. "My name is Mira Hale," she said, forcing each word out. "I don't know what that designation means." The Warden's eyes, swirling voids of rotating symbols, fixed on her with ancient gravity. "You carry the imprint of the fracture world. You are its final heir." The room exploded into panic. Island sobbed. Tarsik hissed and scrambled away. Vorth Khan looked like he might faint. "Miss Hale," he whispered, "what is the fracture world?" Mira's throat tightened. "My colony," she answered, voice cracking for the first time. "At least, that's what we called it." The Warden extended an arm toward her, an invitation and a command. The floor beneath her pulsed with rising energy, the same rhythm she had felt when the ground split open on evacuation night, when shapes she could not describe crawled out of the broken sky. "Stop," Mira whispered, stepping back. "I don't want any of this." "It is not desire that binds you," the Warden replied. "It is inheritance." Her knees nearly buckled, but she held her ground as memories she had suppressed for years detonated behind her eyes, children running through stormlit fields that shifted underfoot, predators evolving in days instead of generations, colonists whispering about impossible geometry in the clouds, and the last night, the night the colony lit up in spirals of impossible light, the night the ground screamed, the night her mother said, "Don't let them wake it," before shoving her into the pod. And now it was awake. The drones tightened their circle. The Warden's halo burned brighter. And Mira knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. "Return to the archive," the Warden commanded. "Your world's story is unfinished." The silence that followed the collapse of the lecture hall was thick enough to suffocate, the kind that hummed with unseen machinery shifting behind the walls as Mira stood on unsteady feet, her pulse a war drum against her ribs, the last echoes of the Academy's lockdown fading into a crawling quiet that felt more like the breath held before a scream than real stillness. She could hear the drones repositioning above the ruined mezzanine, their rotors chopping the air with a predatory softness that reminded her too much of the night her colony was taken, no, not taken, harvested, though no report had ever used that word, no investigator had ever dared, but the memory thrashed through her mind as the fissures beneath her boots sealed with unnatural speed, tendrils of blue-white light retracting into the polished floor as though embarrassed to have revealed themselves at all. Instructor Vorthcan approached hesitantly, mandibles rattling with barely suppressed terror as he extended a trembling hand not to Mira, but toward the place the light had vanished, touching the cooled surface like a priest reaching for the altar of a forbidden god. He recoiled instantly, as though the metal had whispered back. "Cadet Hale," he rasped, his voice a strained modulation of clicks and static, "you must come with me immediately. The High Council has ordered," but he never finished, because the Academy lights flickered again, and the massive holoscreen overhead warped into view with a sharp buzzing whine, displaying a symbol that should not have existed outside sealed military black sites, a circle fractured by 9 descending lines, the mark of an extinction event. Cadets gasped. Some cried. Others scrambled for exits that remained stubbornly sealed. Mira felt the symbol burn into her vision like an old scar reopening. She clenched her fists. "Where," she whispered, not realizing she'd spoken aloud, "did you get access to Archive 9? The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Instructor Vorthcan taking a step back, as though realizing only now what stood before him. We didn't," he managed, voice strangled. "The archive accessed itself." A deep, resonant tremor shuddered through the substructure, and every screen in the hall synced simultaneously, their surface lighting with lines of distorted text that crawled like insects across a carcass. Subject identified, Mira Hale, restricted entry reactivated. Then another line. Event code, return protocol. Then another. Status, incomplete harvest. A sound escaped Mira's throat before she could stop it, a choked inhale that didn't belong to the hardened survivor she'd forced herself to become, but to the terrified child who'd watched her family vanish in a wall of prismatic flame while the ground quaked and the sky peeled apart like wet paper. Cadet Island stumbled toward her, eyes wide and shimmering, her feathers puffed in fear. "Mira, what does that mean?" But Mira couldn't answer, because she didn't know, because she'd spent years trying to forget, but the archive wouldn't let her. Not anymore. For heavily armored security officers burst through the blast doors in a shower of sparks, weapons drawn, but they didn't aim at Mira, they aimed at the consoles, firing EMP rounds that crackled across the hollow displays, attempting to sever the connection that held the entire wing hostage. The screens flickered violently but refused to shut down, instead stabilizing into a new image, a star map, distorted and glitching, the coordinates shifting rapidly until they locked onto a system Mira recognized instantly, the system where her colony had once thrived, where nothing but ash remained. The stabilization field in her chest broke. "Why are you showing me this?" she snarled at the screens, at the drones, at the archive itself. "There's nothing left there." But the map zoomed in anyway, pushing through static and corrupted glyphs until it fixed on a lone, pulsing beacon buried in the debris field of her homeworld. Signal detected. Confirmation, survivor located. Mira froze. Her blood turned to ice. Her heart stopped and then detonated into a frantic panic against her ribs. "What?" she breathed. But the archive did not answer with mercy. Survivor tag, Hale, Lysander. Her father's name. The man she'd watched die, or believed she had, for 12 long, grief-poisoned years. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible." The hall lights exploded overhead. Shards of plexiglass rained down, screams erupting as cadets dove for cover, and the tremor deepened into a seismic jolt that rippled through the Academy's foundations like something enormous shifting beneath them. The emergency shutters slammed down over the windows, sealing the room in a vice of steel. The drones whipped into defensive formation, their targeting lenses flaring as a low, guttural frequency rolled through the chamber, an auditory signature Mira knew intimately, one she had heard only once before, moments before her colony vanished. Instructor Vorthcan staggered, gripping the railing as the frequency intensified. This can't be happening, he choked. This signal hasn't been active since, Mira finished for him, her voice hollow. Since the harvest. The word hung heavy, poisonous, filling the room with the weight of a truth no one had been prepared to face. The archive screens shifted again, now showing fragmented images, her colony's final hours, overlaid with corrupted surveillance footage, buildings collapsing, shadows moving in the prismatic storm, her father racing toward the central spire with a device she'd never seen before, and then the footage cut off with a violent burst of static. Event resumption, 94% synchronized. Return protocol initiated. Mira, we need to leave, Island pleaded, grabbing her arm, but Mira barely felt the contact. Return protocol. Survivor located. Her father alive. Or at least, not fully dead. Something inside her snapped open, a tether that had been buried, dormant, waiting. We're not safe here, Mira said, though her voice felt distant, as if belonging to someone else. The Academy isn't the target. She turned toward the trembling walls, feeling the same wrongness she had felt 12 years ago. I am. Another tremor struck, harder this time, cracking the marble floor. The drone scrambled upward, scanning violently. The screens pixelated, then displayed a single symbol, the fractured circle again. But now, something new pulsed beneath it, a countdown. 5 seconds. 4. 3. Mira didn't think, she moved, grabbing Island and shoving her behind the overturned desks as the countdown hit 0 and a column of blinding light punched through the center of the hall, vaporizing the mezzanine and sending a shockwave that launched bodies like ragdolls across the room. Sound vanished in the eruption. Dust exploded upward in a suffocating cloud. Mira hit the ground hard but rolled, instincts honed by years of nightmares propelling her back to her feet before her vision fully cleared. Through the settling haze, a shape emerged, tall, metallic, too smooth to be natural, too intricate to be machine, an obsidian pillar humming with prismatic veins of light. Not a weapon. Not a drone. A beacon. The same beacon she had seen in the archive's star map. And it was here. It had come for her. Vorthcan screamed something, but his voice was drowned beneath the rising hum of the beacon as narrow slits opened along its surface, releasing tendrils of shimmering vapor that slithered across the floor like sentient fog. The cadets scrambled back, but the vapor ignored them entirely, streaking instead toward Mira with predatory precision. She ran. But the vapor moved faster, coiling around her ankles, her wrists, her throat, filling her nose with the metallic tang of ozone and memory. She choked, stumbling as the whispering frequency grew louder, folding in on itself like a voice spoken backward. Island seized Mira's arm, trying to pull her away, but the vapor lashed out and flung Island across the hall with brutal force, sending her crashing into a collapsed beam. Mira screamed her name, but the vapor constricted, and her vision blurred as the beacon pulsed again, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat. Then the drones opened fire, unleashing a barrage of plasma bolts that hammered the beacon's surface, but every strike dissolved harmlessly into the prismatic glow. The beacon responded not with aggression, but with activation. Its surface spiraled open like an unfolding flower, revealing a core of swirling geometric light that rotated in impossible patterns, shapes that hurt to look at, shapes she remembered from the night she lost everything. A gravitational pull hit her like a tidal wave, dragging her toward the core even as she clawed at the floor, her nails scraping sparks from the metal. Stop, she screamed, though she didn't know whether she meant the archive, the beacon, or her own memories. The only answer was the core brightening further, the pull intensifying, and the same message echoing across every shattered console in the hall. Return protocol, acceptance required. I never accepted anything, she cried, but the pull ripped her fingers from the floor, lifting her toward the light. Vorthcan lunged forward, seizing her wrist with surprising strength, anchoring his feet against the twisted railing. Fight it, he begged. Cadet Hale, do you hear me? Fight it. She tried. Stars burst behind her eyes. Her bones felt like they were vibrating apart. But the beacon wasn't just pulling her physically, it was pulling memory, pulling identity, unraveling her like thread. She saw flashes, her father dragging her through the collapsing colony corridors, shoving her into the evac transport, sealing the hatch as the prismatic storm closed in. His voice, hoarse and desperate, "Mira, listen to me. If the signal finds you, run. Don't let it take you the way it took." The memory fragmented. The beacon surged. Vorthcan slipped, his grip faltering. And Mira, suspended inches from the core, felt something ancient reach through the light and curl cold fingers around her mind. Then, the beacon shattered. A deafening crack split the air as a blast of raw energy erupted outward, throwing Mira across the hall like a broken doll. She hit the ground hard, pain lancing through her ribs as the world flickered in and out of focus. When she finally forced her eyes open, the beacon lay in ruin, its core extinguished, its obsidian petals scattered like the remains of a slaughtered creature. And standing in the center of the wreckage, was a silhouette. Tall. Familiar. Impossible. Mira's heart stopped, then lurched painfully into motion. Because the figure stepped forward, emerging through the drifting ash with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim emergency lights, eyes she had seen thousands of times in her dreams. "Mira," the figure whispered, voice trembling, raw, achingly human. "I'm sorry it reached you first." Mira's breath broke. Her vision swam. Her knees gave out. "Dad." But Lysander Hale didn't answer with relief. He looked past her, toward the cracks forming in the far wall, cracks glowing with the same prismatic light she had feared her entire life. "We have to leave," he said urgently, extending a hand. "It's not done, and it's coming." The world around Mira warped into a smear of fractured light as she stared at the impossible figure standing amid the shattered remains of the beacon, her father's silhouette flickering like an image captured between frames, his outline glitching with the prismatic pulses still leaking from the cracked floor beneath him, and for a suspended, breathless instant the entire hall seemed to forget how to move, how to breathe, how to exist, as if the universe itself hesitated at the paradox of a dead man standing. Lysander Hale took a step toward her, the soft crunch of debris under his boots somehow louder than the alarms wailing through the ruins, and Mira felt her knees weaken as memories she had barricaded for 12 years howled back into her, her father's laugh, his voice telling her stories about constellations, the warmth of his hand on her shoulder the night before everything burned. And yet the man before her was both that father and something unbearably changed, his eyes carrying the same warmth. She remembered, but layered now with a depth of exhaustion, of knowing, of surviving something that should have annihilated body and soul alike. "We don't have time," he said again, but the room erupted into chaos before she could answer as security forces flooded in through the buckled doors, weapons raised, targeting lasers dancing across the wreckage, and three were immediately thrown backward by a sudden surge of prismatic pressure that burst from the cracked beacon core like a dying star exhaling its final breath. Vorthcan stumbled toward Mira, antennae trembling violently. "Lysander Hale is deceased," he rasped in disbelief. "He cannot be," but her father cut him off with a single look, a look that was equal parts warning and sorrow. "Do not finish that sentence," he said, voice low, each word weighted as though he'd carried them for years. "Not while it is listening." The hall fell into an eerie, heavy silence, the kind that seemed to swallow sound rather than allow it to escape, and Mira felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine as she realized the prismatic cracks along the far wall were no longer passive, they were widening, splitting the metallic surface like a chrysalis tearing open from the wrong side, the glow inside deepening into the same impossible spectrum of colors she remembered from the harvest, colors that did not belong in any natural wavelength. "Dad," Mira whispered, her voice trembling despite every instinct screaming at her to stay strong, stay sharp, stay alive. "What's coming through those cracks?" Her father did not answer immediately, He looked at the widening fractures with an expression Mira had never seen on him before, the look of someone bracing to face a nightmare that had followed him across years, across star systems, across realities. The harvest wasn't an attack, he finally said, barely above a whisper. It was a retrieval. And this, he gestured toward the cracks as a low, thrumming vibration rolled through the room, is the continuation of what it started. Aileen, injured but conscious, pushed herself upright from where she'd been tossed across the hall, feathers matted with dust and blood, eyes wide with terror. "Why you?" she croaked. "Why is it after you?" The answer came not from Lysander, but from the prismatic fractures themselves, which let out a deep, resonant pulse that rattled every bone in Mira's body and sent the nearest drones crashing violently from the air as their systems fried on impact. The pulse was not sound, it was a signal, one Mira felt inside her skull, vibrating against the very core of her memory, tugging at the edges of her identity like fingers trying to pull threads loose from a tightly woven fabric. Her vision blurred. Her hearing warped. The world oscillated as though reality had been knocked off its axis, and she staggered, clutching her head as an overwhelming whisper bled through her thoughts. Return. Incomplete. Return. Stop it, she gasped, falling to one knee as the whisper sharpened into a many-layered voice that was not human, not alien, not anything she could comprehend. Get out of my head. Her father crossed the distance between them in a flash, dropping to his knees and gripping her shoulders with both hands, grounding her with a force that felt achingly familiar. Listen to me, Mira, he said urgently, it's trying to synchronize with you. It needs a living anchor to complete the protocol. She blinked up at him through the pounding static in her head. Why me? His jaw tightened. Because you were never meant to escape. The fractures widened with a violent screech, metal bending like paper, and a flood of prismatic vapor burst through like living smoke, crawling along the floor, searching, sensing, homing in on Mira with terrifying precision. Officers fired desperately into the vapor, but the bolts passed through harmlessly, dissolving into refracted shards of light as though swallowed by another dimension. We need to move, Lysander said, pulling Mira to her feet. Now. Vorthcan stumbled backward, mandibles clicking frantically. Move where? The academy is sealed, there's a maintenance access behind the lower deck, her father snapped, but we need to get there before the signal stabilizes. Aileen limped toward them, determined despite her injuries. Then let's go. But the moment they turned toward the exit, the fractures emitted a second pulse, stronger, sharper, surgical, and the vapor surged forward like a tidal wave of living color, cutting off their path, crawling up the walls, sealing every escape with ribbons of shimmering energy. Then the vapor spoke, not in words, but in a harmonic resonance that vibrated through the air like a choir of fractured mirrors, and Mira felt the world tilt as she suddenly saw, not the academy, not the hall, but memories that were not hers, flashes of alien structures built from light and crystal, worlds with impossible geometries, machines older than civilizations, harvesting cycles spanning millennia, and at the center of it all a consciousness vast enough to eclipse stars, searching endlessly, endlessly, endlessly for something it had lost, its anchor. The vision snapped, and Mira collapsed to one knee, gasping, drenched in cold sweat. Lysander caught her, but his face had gone pale, eyes wide with dread. It's accelerating, he whispered. It's realized you're close. Close to what? Mira demanded, her voice shaking, but he didn't answer, because the vapor convulsed violently, spiraling upward into a towering shape of shifting light and shadow, vaguely humanoid but wrong in every possible way, its form distorting every time Mira's eyes tried to focus on it, as if reality were rejecting the idea of what it was. The creature, if creature was even the right word, extended a limb made of broken spectrums, and the entire room bowed inward like gravity itself had bent around it. Mira staggered back, horror crawling across her skin. Dad, what is that? Lysander swallowed hard. The thing the galaxy thinks is a myth, he said. The thing that destroyed our colony. He tightened his grip on her arm. The thing that wants you back. The next morning, the tiny office felt charged, as if someone had plugged the whole place directly into the sun, the air buzzing with nervous energy that none of them could name but all of them could feel. Aisha walked in first, balancing a tray of kopi cups with her eyes still puffy from too little sleep. Daniel was already at his desk typing furiously as he hunted down a stubborn bug that refused to die despite his early start, and Ravi stood by the window watching Kuala Lumpur wake in slow motion, the rising hum of traffic below sounding like a restless giant stretching its limbs, until he finally turned around, face tight with focus, and said, "Today is the day," and the moment the words left his mouth, they all felt the weight of them settle into the room because they knew exactly what he meant. Their prototype was ready, at least ready enough to show to someone important, and they had secured a meeting with Urban Ride, one of the fastest-growing mobility companies in the city, a company that could take their predictive routing algorithm and turn it into the foundation of something real, something used by thousands, maybe millions. And that possibility brought with it equal parts excitement and dread because if Urban Ride liked what they built, they could land their first enterprise partnership, but if Urban Ride didn't, well, none of them wanted to finish the sentence. The office slid into a focused kind of chaos, Aisha refining slides again and again, adjusting phrasing, tightening numbers, making sure every graph told a story without needing extra explanation, Daniel rewriting a chunk of back-end between sips of kopi, whispering frustrated curses under his breath whenever his code misbehaved. Ravi pacing like an anxious lawyer rehearsing the speech that might determine whether the courtroom acquitted or condemned him, reciting lines until Daniel muttered, without looking up, that he was saying, "state of the art," too many times, and Ravi shot back that it was state of the art, and Daniel replied that saying it more than twice made it sound like they were trying to convince themselves, and Aisha snorted, saying maybe they were, and their laughter spilled into the room, not because the joke was particularly funny, but because laughing was easier than acknowledging their shared fear. At noon, they packed everything into Ravi's battered old backpack, the laptop with the prototype, the HDMI cable in case Urban Ride's meeting room refused to cooperate, the power bank, and even a printed version of their pitch deck because Aisha insisted that technology always failed when stakes were high, then locked the office and walked out into the heat of midday. They took the train to the business district, sitting in silence as the city rushed past them, each of them lost in their own mental rehearsals, imagining all the ways the meeting could go right and all the ways it could go wrong. When they arrived at Urban Ride's tower, a sleek, glass-wrapped structure with polished floors, cold air conditioning, and employees who wore expensive watches and moved with the efficiency of people who didn't waste time, they signed in, took the lift to the 17th floor, and stepped out into a lobby where everything smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaning spray and professionalism. They were greeted by Ms. Leong, Urban Ride's operations director, a woman known throughout the industry as sharp, fast, and allergic to nonsense. She shook their hands with quick precision and said, "You have 15 minutes, not unkindly, but with the unmistakable tone of someone who had back-to-back meetings and didn't intend to be late for any of them." The pitch began immediately. Ravi opened with the vision, his voice steady enough to hide the tremor in his chest, painting a clear picture of what adaptive routing could mean for Urban Ride's operational efficiency. Aisha stepped in seamlessly with market insights, user pain points, and the measurable value of cutting wait times and idle routes. Then Daniel moved to the center of the room and started the live demo, which was risky but necessary because a simulation wouldn't impress someone like Ms. Leong. For the first minute, everything worked. The interface responded smoothly, the predictions updated in real time, and Daniel felt the beginnings of relief warming his chest, until suddenly the screen froze and the loading wheel appeared, spinning lazily like it had all the time in the world, and the seconds ticked by, 3, 5, 7, 12, and Daniel's blood drained from his face as helpless panic clawed at his throat. He could feel Ravi stiffen beside him, could hear the AC humming loudly, or maybe it was just their heartbeat amplifying inside their ears, and he imagined Ms. Leong mentally crossing their startup off a list, preparing to thank them politely and show them the door. But before the silence could become fatal, Aisha stepped forward with perfect composure, her tone calm, almost conversational, as she said, "What you're seeing is exactly why companies like Urban Ride need this product. The real world is unpredictable. Data fluctuates. Connectivity dips. Systems get overloaded. And our algorithm is designed to recover intelligently under real-world stress, not just inside a controlled environment." As if answering her cue, the system stabilized, recalculated, and finished the task, the frozen wool dissolving into clean output. Ms. Leong raised an eyebrow, not in annoyance but in curiosity, and said, "Show me that again." This time the demo ran flawlessly. When it ended, she leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled, eyes sharp as she assessed them. "What you're building is ambitious," she said. "A lot of startups promise efficiency. Very few demonstrate resilience. You handled that failure better than most teams I've seen." The three founders stood completely still, barely breathing, waiting for the next words. "I'm willing to offer you a pilot," she continued. 3 months. Limited scale. Paid. For a moment, the room fell silent except for the faint buzzing of the lights. Aisha released a shaky breath she had been holding for minutes. Daniel's shoulders sagged in pure relief. Ravi felt something inside his chest finally loosen, and he managed a quiet, stunned, "Thank you. You won't regret this," to which Ms. Leong responded with a small, ambiguous smile and the words, "We'll see," before moving on to her next meeting. When they left the building, they didn't scream, or jump around, or call their families with the news. Instead, they walked together into the car park and just stood there, breathing, letting the reality settle over them with slow, warm certainty. The city moved around them as usual, cars passing, people hurrying by, sunlight reflecting off the glass towers, but something felt different, as if the world had tilted a few degrees in their favor. Daniel was the first to break the silence, whispering, "Guys, we actually did it." Ravi nodded, eyes still distant with disbelief. "This is the first step." Aisha grinned at both of them, raising her paper coffee cup like a toast. "Then let's keep climbing." They clinked their cups together, not caring that the coffee inside was now lukewarm, because in that quiet moment, in that ordinary car park, something extraordinary had happened. For the first time since they started, their dream didn't just feel possible, it felt real, tangible, and waiting for them to chase it. The pilot agreement with Urban Ride didn't change their bank accounts overnight, didn't suddenly make headlines, didn't magically fix the leaks in the office ceiling, but it changed everything else. The way they walked into the room the next morning, the way they opened their laptops, the way silence felt. For the first time, the three of them weren't just building toward a dream, they were building for a client with a ticking clock. The air in the tiny office felt heavier with responsibility but lighter with possibility, a strange blend that sent adrenaline humming through each of them. Ravi arrived early, earlier than usual, sitting alone at his desk and staring at the whiteboard that had once been filled with optimistic scribbles and now looked more like a battlefield map. The tasks were real now. Deliverables. Deadlines. Expectations. When Aisha walked in, she found him deep in thought, marker in hand, drawing arrows and timelines with the intensity of someone who suddenly realized the stakes had doubled. "You're scaring me," she said, setting down a stack of notebooks. "Good," Ravi replied. "We should be a little scared." Daniel stumbled in a few minutes later, hair in full chaos mode, clutching a half-eaten bun and mumbling through a mouthful, "We starting already," and the day began. The next weeks unfolded in a blur, a new rhythm fueled by pressure, caffeine, and the fragile excitement of real progress. Urban Ride's operations team sent over data sets larger than anything they had tested with before, and Daniel practically moved into the office, sleeping on the couch most nights while muttering in his half-conscious state about memory leaks and computational inefficiencies. Aisha coordinated directly with Urban Ride, running user interviews, mapping workflows, and absorbing every complaint drivers had about delays, detours, and unpredictable peak hours. She returned each day with pages of notes, which she distilled into structured requirements that Ravi translated into strategy and Daniel turned into architecture. They were sprinting now, not the chaotic panic of early prototyping, but the sharp, deliberate speed of a team that knows exactly what it needs to accomplish and who is counting on them. But momentum came with new stresses. Urban Ride wanted weekly progress reviews. They wanted revised metrics. They wanted the system to work not just, in theory, but at scale, across thousands of vehicles and millions of data points. One afternoon, during a video call, Urban Ride's data engineer, a man named Yu with a monotone voice and the patience of a metronome, asked, "Can your algorithm maintain performance under real-time load balancing when fed unpredictable spikes?" Daniel paused, internally panicking. Ravi jumped in with a smooth, "We're implementing reinforcement strategies to handle volatility." Aisha smiled politely while gripping her pen hard enough to bend the clip. When the call ended, all three of them groaned in unison. "Do we have reinforcement strategies?" Daniel asked. "We will," Ravi said. "Soon," Aisha added. And so they went back to work. Despite the pressure, or maybe because of it, something shifted in them. Their arguments became sharper but also more productive. Daniel no longer took feedback personally, he took it as a challenge. Aisha trusted the data more than her assumptions. Ravi, who had always feared being too optimistic or too demanding, finally embraced being a leader rather than merely a founder. There were moments of frustration, yes, like the night the simulation crashed at 3 a.m., wiping out 8 hours of training, or when Urban Ride requested a minor feature adjustment that turned out to require rethinking half the workflow. But with each obstacle, they found themselves growing into the version of the team they had always hoped they could be. Then came the first field test. Urban Ride arranged for a small group of drivers to run the pilot system during their evening routes. The three founders rode in the back of an operations car, watching live telemetry on their laptops as the sun dipped behind the high-rises, streetlights flickered on, and the city shifted into its nighttime rhythm. A driver named Faisal, friendly and chatty, kept glancing at his mounted phone as it displayed the algorithm-suggested routes. "If this thing can help me avoid Jalan Tun Razak jam at 6 p.m., he said, "I'll personally buy you all dinner." They laughed, but inside, all three founders were quietly terrified. This was the moment. Data in motion. Predictions interacting with human decisions. The real world had teeth, and they were about to find out if their model could withstand the bite. The first hour went smoothly. The system adjusted efficiently to mid-route changes and traffic surges. Ravi whispered updates. Daniel monitored CPU spikes and muttered in relief each time the graph stabilized. Aisha watched Faisal's reactions carefully, cataloging every micro-expression. But midway through the second hour, the algorithm flagged an anomaly, a sudden traffic buildup caused by an unreported road closure. The model hesitated, oscillating between two route options. "Come on," Daniel murmured, tapping his trackpad like it needed encouragement. The delay stretched from harmless to noticeable. "It's okay," Aisha said softly, though she wasn't sure it was. The model finally corrected, choosing the alternate route and updating the rest of the fleet accordingly. Faisal nodded, impressed. "Smart," he said. But the hesitation gnawed at the founders for the rest of the ride. They knew Urban Ride would notice. They knew they had to fix it. Back in the office, exhaustion warred with exhilaration. They had succeeded. Not perfectly, but undeniably. The pilot was working. They ordered cheap fried rice from the mammoth downstairs and ate on the floor while watching the logs replay. "We need better uncertainty handling," Daniel said between bites. "We need more edge case mapping," Aisha added. "We need sleep," Ravi concluded. They compromised by deciding to work one more hour before collapsing. The next morning, an unexpected email arrived from Ms. Leong. The subject line was short, "Good start." The message inside was even shorter, just a few lines about improvements needed, data she was forwarding, and a request for a follow-up meeting to discuss expansion criteria. But buried in the corporate tone was something unmistakable: validation. Real validation. The kind founders don't forget. For the rest of the week, they pushed forward with renewed clarity. Coffee cups multiplied. Whiteboards filled. The bug that caused the hesitation was identified and fixed. New predictive models were added. Internal testing cycles ran longer and smoother. They were leveling up, still under-resourced, still underslept, but undeniably better than they had been even a month ago. Late one night, after Daniel had fallen asleep face first on his keyboard and Aisha had curled up on the couch with a blanket, Ravi stood by the window again, looking out over the glowing city. KL no longer looked indifferent. It looked alive, humming, moving, shifting, just like their startup. He felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months: confidence. Not hope. Not possibility. Confidence. They were not just dreamers anymore. They were builders. And for the first time, they were moving with momentum.